Every empire in history believed it was different. The Romans thought their republic was eternal. The British assumed the sun would never set on their dominion. The Spanish were convinced God had chosen them. They were all wrong, and every single one of them collapsed following the same pattern. The same sequence of events, the same warning signs. Right now, America is matching that pattern almost perfectly. Not in vague, metaphorical ways, in specific, measurable, documented ways, and almost nobody is paying attention. The study of empire collapse isn't some fringe academic exercise. Historians, economists, and political scientists have spent centuries identifying what kills superpowers, and they've found something unsettling. The pattern is remarkably consistent. It doesn't matter whether you're looking at Rome in 476 AD, Spain in the 1600s, the Dutch Republic in the 1700s, or the British Empire in the 1900s. The same symptoms appear, the same sequence unfolds, the same ending arrives. There are roughly 6 stages that every collapsing empire moves through. Stage 1 is the rise, characterized by productivity, innovation, and expansion. Stage 2 is the peak, where military and economic dominance reaches its maximum. Stage 3 is overextension, where the empire stretches beyond its capacity to sustain. Stage 4 is financial deterioration, marked by debt, currency debasement, and wealth inequality. Stage 5 is internal conflict, where political polarization and social unrest tear at the fabric of society. Stage 6 is collapse or decline, where the empire either falls dramatically or fades into irrelevance over decades. America has completed stages 1 through 4. The country is deep into stage 5, and the indicators for stage 6 are starting to appear. Rome's decline took roughly 300 years, but the pattern was clear. Military overextension drained the treasury. To compensate, emperors debased the currency, dropping the silver content in coins from nearly 100% to less than 5%. Inflation devastated the middle class. Wealth concentrated among elites who owned land and hard assets. Political instability followed. Between 235 and 285 AD, Rome cycled through over 20 emperors, most of them assassinated. Citizens stopped believing in the system. When external pressures came, nothing held things together. Spain followed the same trajectory. In the 1500s, the Spanish Empire was the most powerful force on earth. The Spanish dollar was the world's reserve currency. Gold flowed in from the Americas, yet Spain declared bankruptcy 4 times under Philip II alone. Military campaigns in the Netherlands, France, and against the Ottomans simultaneously drained resources faster than New World treasure could replenish them. Wealth inequality exploded. Regional tensions fractured the nation. By the mid-1600s, Spain had lost its status as Europe's dominant power and never recovered. Britain offers perhaps the most relevant comparison. At its peak in 1920, Britain controlled 25% of the world's land surface. The pound sterling was the global reserve currency. Within 30 years, Britain was borrowing from the IMF to stay solvent. 2 world wars drained the treasury. Military overextension became unsustainable. The pound lost reserve status. In 1956, during the Suez Crisis, American financial pressure forced a humiliating British withdrawal, revealing that the empire could no longer act independently. The collapse came faster than anyone expected. The pattern across all these empires is consistent enough to be predictive. Military overextension leads to financial strain. Financial strain leads to currency debasement and debt. Debt leads to wealth inequality and middle-class erosion. Economic stress leads to political polarization. Polarization leads to institutional breakdown. Breakdown leads to collapse. So where does America fit? The uncomfortable answer is nearly everywhere on this checklist. Start with military overextension. The United States currently maintains approximately 750 military bases in at least 80 countries around the world. No empire in history has ever attempted to project power across this many locations simultaneously. Defense spending exceeds $800 billion annually, more than the next 10 countries combined. Since 2001, America has spent an estimated $8 trillion on wars in the Middle East and related operations. The war in Afghanistan lasted 20 years, longer than any conflict in American history, and ended with the Taliban back in control. The war in Iraq destabilized an entire region and produced no clear strategic victory. This is textbook imperial overreach, the exact pattern that preceded every major empire's decline. The financial deterioration is even more stark. The national debt has surpassed $34 trillion. To put that in perspective, in 1990 it was $3 trillion. In 2000 it was $5.6 trillion. In 2010 it was $13.5 trillion. In 2020 it was $27 trillion. The growth isn't linear, it's exponential. And here's the detail that should alarm everyone. Interest payments on this debt now exceed $800 billion annually. That's more than the entire defense budget. The government is borrowing money to pay interest on money it already borrowed. This is the debt spiral that has preceded every imperial financial collapse in history. The federal deficit continues to grow, regardless of which party holds power. During economic expansions, when deficits should shrink, they've grown. Tax cuts reduce revenue. Spending increases continue. The structural incentives of American politics make fiscal responsibility nearly impossible. Every politician who proposes serious cuts loses their next election. Every politician who proposes tax increases loses their next election. The system is designed to produce exactly the outcome it's producing. Currency concerns are no longer theoretical. The US dollar has been the world's reserve currency since the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944. This status provides enormous advantages. America can borrow cheaply. It can run deficits that would destroy other economies. It can print money to solve problems that other nations cannot. But reserve currency status is not permanent. The pound sterling held that status before the dollar, the Dutch guilder before that, the Spanish dollar before that. Each transition happened when the underlying empire lost its economic dominance. Today, the signals of dollar erosion are multiplying. China and Russia conduct bilateral trade in yuan and rubles, bypassing the dollar entirely. Saudi Arabia has discussed accepting yuan for oil sales, something unthinkable a decade ago. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, are actively developing alternative payment systems. Central banks globally have been accumulating gold at the fastest pace in decades, a hedge against dollar instability. In 2022 and 2023, central bank gold purchases broke all historical records. These institutions aren't doing this for nostalgia. They're preparing for a transition. Wealth inequality in America has reached levels that historically precede social upheaval. The top 1% of Americans now hold more wealth than the entire middle class combined. The top 10% own nearly 70% of all wealth. The bottom 50% own just 2.5%. These aren't political talking points. This is Federal Reserve data, published quarterly, available to anyone who looks. In 1990, the ratio of CEO pay to average worker pay was roughly 60 to 1. Today, it exceeds 350 to 1. The middle class, which is the stabilizing force in any society, is being hollowed out. The consequences of this inequality are visible everywhere. Housing has become unaffordable in most major cities. A single-income household could buy a median home in the 1970s. Today, dual-income households struggle to afford rent in many markets. Medical debt is the leading cause of personal bankruptcy. Student loan debt exceeds $1.7 trillion. An entire generation has been priced out of the wealth-building mechanisms that previous generations took for granted. When wealth concentrates this dramatically, social cohesion breaks down. People stop believing the rules are fair. They stop trusting institutions. They become susceptible to populist movements promising to tear down the system. This isn't speculation. It's the documented historical pattern. Extreme inequality preceded the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, and the collapse of the Roman Republic. America is now more unequal than France in 1789. Political polarization has reached measurable extremes. Pew Research has tracked partisan attitudes for decades. The ideological gap between Democrats and Republicans has tripled since 1994. The percentage of each party viewing the other as a threat to the nation's well-being has increased from roughly 20% in the 1990s to over 60% today. Americans increasingly live in different information ecosystems, consuming different news, believing different facts, occupying different realities. Compromise has become politically toxic. Bipartisanship is viewed as betrayal. Political violence, once unthinkable in modern America, has become normalized. The Capitol was stormed in January 2021. A sitting Speaker of the House had her husband attacked in their home. Members of Congress require security details. Threats against elected officials have increased over 400% since 2016. This is not the behavior of a stable empire at its peak. This is the behavior of a society in stage 5 decline. Trust in institutions has collapsed to historic lows. Gallup tracks institutional confidence annually. Congress has an approval rating consistently below 20%. Trust in the media has fallen below 35%. Confidence in the Supreme Court has dropped dramatically. Trust in the electoral system itself has eroded, with millions of Americans believing elections are fraudulent regardless of evidence. When citizens stop believing in the legitimacy of their institutions, those institutions cease to function. Legitimacy is the invisible force that makes laws obeyed and transfers of power peaceful. America is spending down its legitimacy reserves at an alarming rate. The government's basic functionality has deteriorated. Congress routinely threatens debt-ceiling catastrophes, turning routine fiscal management into hostage situations. Government shutdowns have become regular occurrences. The ability to pass a basic budget has broken down. Appointments go unfilled. Agencies operate on temporary funding. Infrastructure crumbles. The machinery of government grinds slower each year. None of this requires conspiracy theories or partisan interpretation. These are measurable trends documented by mainstream institutions. The Congressional Budget Office publishes the debt projections. The Federal Reserve publishes the wealth inequality data. Academic institutions track the polarization. Military spending is public record. The pattern isn't hidden. It's simply information that most people prefer not to synthesize into a coherent picture. Empires rarely collapse suddenly. Rome took 300 years. Spain took 200 years. Britain took about 50 years from peak to secondary status. The speed of decline often correlates with the speed of communication and economic interconnection. In today's instantaneous global economy, transitions may happen faster than historical precedents suggest. What typically happens in the final stages is a trigger event. For Rome, it was the sack of the city by Visigoths. For Britain, it was World War II. For Spain, it was the loss of the Armada. The trigger isn't the cause of collapse. The underlying deterioration is. The trigger simply reveals how hollow the structure has become. The people living through imperial decline rarely recognize it in real time. Romans in 400 AD thought they were experiencing a difficult period, not the end of their civilization. British citizens in 1945 believed they remained a great power. The psychological resistance to recognizing decline is immense. National identity is wrapped up in permanence and exceptionalism. This belief is always wrong. The pattern doesn't care about exceptionalism. It doesn't care about ideology. It operates on structural forces, debt, overextension, inequality, polarization, institutional decay. These forces have destroyed every empire in history. There is no evidence suggesting America is immune. The pattern has played out dozens of times across human history. America is not exempt. The only question is timing. Welcome to Stage 5.